Well, good morning. Thank you, Karen, for the introduction. One of the things she didn't say, though, was geologist, and that's because I'm not a geologist. I might play one on YouTube from time to time, but I do citizen science and geology. So this is a little bit of a story about what some things I've been working on, but a little bit about two floods that we want to talk about. So, next slide. So, yeah, today, two different floods that we've heard about. Actually, I'm going to mention three floods, but we'll deal with that a little bit later. When I started looking at learning about geology, and part of that comes from, as you mentioned, Nick Zentner, who was a geologist from Central Washington University at Ellensburg, who has a TV show on, or has clips on public television, Cascade Public Television, and he's been broadcasting literally hundreds of YouTube videos, is the role of the church in early geology, and that it was really early ministers and clergy that kind of got the whole science of geology started. Go to the next slide, and the next one. Originally, the Bible was kind of considered the authoritative book on history and the history of the earth, and because clergy were the most educated and arguably had time on their hands during the middle of the week, would do that. One of the earliest, Archbishop Usher, did some calculations and determined that the Earth was, in this is about 1650, that the Earth was created in 4004 BC on October 23rd around 6 p.m. That's pretty precise dating. Not quite sure how he got there, but yeah, the early ministers calculated an exact birth of the Earth. They also calculated that Noah's flood happened in 234 or 2394 BC as evidence of some of the things they found there. So, okay, those are some interesting dates. That's even better than science today can determine in terms of exact times. But that's why ministers started studying rocks. Next slide. That really the early 1800s, they tried to match geology to matching Genesis. Most, again, were the Anglican evangelicals who were doing this work, and again promoting global floods as a way to explain all the different rock layers that they were starting to observe. Most of this was happening, or a lot of this was happening in England and Scotland, was sort of the birthplace of modern geology. But even then, the creationism approach to geology was starting to run head on into some of the science that people were finding. Later on, next slide, that a Scottish minister, Thomas Chambers, came up with something he called the gap theory to try to reconcile what they were finding on Earth to what the Bible was saying, and he determined that actually there were two creations, one very, very ancient of an initial Earth, then Satan destroyed the Earth, and then again God created it again in 6 days sometime later as a way to do that. But again, that was a little hard to explain in terms of some of the things that they were finding in merging science and scripture together. Next slide. Again, they started promoting this global flood as a way to explain why they were finding fossils, and arguing that the layers of sediment that they would find in the rock layers were all deposited by some giant flood. And of course, with the ministers being influential, trying to shape public opinion to understand that there was a great flood that created all that. They expected to find, when they were trying to look for the flood evidence, that they'd find all the rock layers stacked up on one, all the fossils would be jumbled together, and that it really was kind of a young Earth that they were hoping to find. Unfortunately, that's not what happened. And James Hutton was one of the first minister geologists to show that that actually the Earth formed over a very long period of time, while the early ministers really went to a creationism theory. He started something called uniformitarianism, which is a mouthful of words, but to explain that that Earth was built very, very slowly over time, and that the rock cycles were laid down over millennia. And of course, this sort of ran head on into the idea that the Earth was only 6,000 years old. So when they were looking for this evidence, they found what they call diluvial gravels, which are basically rocks and gravel all mixed together. Today we call that glacial till or glacial moraine. If you've lived here any length of time and tried to dig a hole in your yard and live in the thing, you know how much gravel and rocks you dig up living here in the Spokane aquifer. That's all glacial flood material, what they call diluvial gravel. But at the time, that was found later to be glacial. The erratic boulders that we find around, we'll talk about those a little bit more in a minute, but those erratic boulders were carried onto the scene by water and by ice, not by some local flood. And around the 1930s is when they finally kind of, at least the geology community, decided that the floods, that Noah's floods were not valid, and we'll leave those to theology. So really determined that the Earth is ancient, and that the floods, or that Genesis was not really valid for that there's really a long ordered history of the Earth. We can't find any record of a global flood in history. There's all sorts of problems, like where did the water come from and where did the water go if you're entirely covered with water. And so again, geology really interpreted, or Genesis was reinterpreted as theology and not really as a geological handbook. And that's really when geology kind of came out as a science in the 1800s. What they found, of course, is that the fossils were really in a sequence of finding old fossils and newer fossils on top of those, and newer fossils on top of those, and dinosaur bones on top of those. That it was very laid out sequences. A geologist named William Strata Smith really invented the science of stratigraphy, of mapping out layers of rocks and finding those same layers around the world. And that implies, obviously, that there's a long, long history of fossils and building up on that. So by that time, Noah's flood had pretty much been discounted, at least as a scientific reality. I couldn't resist this one slide. I've always kind of wondered, what did they feed the carnivores on Noah's Ark? or the dinosaurs, but that's for another discussion. By the time we got to settling North America, and that the early missionaries and pioneers tried to start linking up stories of ancient floods here. If you're familiar with the area around Tri-Cities, there's a place called Rattlesnake Hills or Rattlesnake Mountains. The Native Americans have a name for those mountains, Island Above the Lake. Like, well, how did they know that? There's no lake in the Tri-Cities. But there's evidence that there were Native Americans or First Peoples in this area during at least parts of the floods, and that obviously they would have been impacted, at least those living along the river, when these floods happened. But the early missionaries tried to link the floods, or to what they observed here as floods, to Noah's flood, to really not much success. But there was an attempt in those days with the missionaries to try and reinterpret what they saw as floods as part of Noah's Ark. But again, modern science sort of started to overrun that. So the study of geology kind of went through three phases, and the last one, catastrophism, really kind of came out of the study of these Ice Age floods and the work of J. Harlan Bretz. Next slide. My one scientific slide here, if you can see that, but In the last 2 million years, which is called the Pleistocene, there have been many ice advances in climate change. This is a graph of oxygen isotopes taken from ice cores, and we can tell that when the Earth was warm, there was a lot of water in the oceans, and when the Earth was cold, there was a lot of water and ice, and it changes this isotope ratio. On the left-hand side of the screen, about 20,000 years ago was the last cold spell, and at the extreme left-hand is kind of where we are today with global warming, which is not necessarily new. You can see here there's been plenty of periods of global warming and global chilling over the last million years, and likely there have been multiple ice ages here. The challenge with some of the things we're studying ice ages and floods is that the floods are very good at wiping out the evidence of the previous generation of ice sheets. So what you see around here, the landscape we have today, it was carved by the last floods, but not necessarily the first floods. There are places down south by Washtenaw where there are flood gravels that are over 700,000 years old that they've discovered. We can tell that by magnetic reversals of the part of the sediments in there. So floods are not new for this area. However, what is new, there's a new national parks animation. So as mentioned, I work with the Ice Age Floods Institute, and the Institute works with the Park Service to help educate people on the floods. And this is a new animation I thought I would show just for a couple minutes that shows the floods in this area. Again, the ice sheets got down to probably this area down to Athol and the south end of Lake Pend Oreille. There's a debate whether or not ice was over the top of Spokane or not. Certainly the water was here when this all happened. So, but up at Athol, there's probably maybe a 2,000-foot wall of ice from when the ice sheet was the furthest advanced. So we'll play this animation to give you kind of an idea what the floods happened. So yeah, we do really live in a unique environment here that had been carved out by those floods. It's quite amazing, and the sheer size of them, that's what gave early geologists really, they couldn't envision something that large causing that much chaos. Next slide. The floods again, before the floods even happened, there was an ice sheet in the Okanagan area that blocked the Columbia River at Grand Coulee, and that created a lake here in Spokane called Glacial Lake Columbia. Where we're sitting right now is about elevation, 1,900-foot elevation here at the church. The Glacial Lake Glacial Lake Columbia had a shoreline of about 2,300 feet, so we would have been under about 400 feet of water just with the lake sitting here for maybe hundreds of years before the ice sheets got here. The ice dam at Clark Fork backed up the Clark Fork River into Missoula. That water depth was about 4,200 feet of water in Glacial Lake Columbia or Missoula. And then when that all let loose and dumped into Glacial Lake Columbia, it raised the water level to about 2,600 feet right here where we're sitting right now. So 800 feet of water would be right over the top of the church. So it was a enormous amount of water that poured into here and created the things that we see today. As you see the floods from space, next slide, that it's left an indelible mark on eastern Washington. Again, you can drive, whether you just see it up here on the Palisades, drive all through this area and see evidence of the floods and see these channels that got carved, very visible from space. If we go to our area a little bit, it's a little bit harder to see in the Rathdrum Prairie. Next slide. That the floods, of course, we populated it and cut trees down, and it's a little bit harder to see here. But if we take and use some space shuttle data and strip away all of the trees and things, we see a really different landscape than we see from from normal photographs of the Earth. This is a picture or an area of the upper Rathdrum Prairie. You can see on the upper right the end of Lake Ponderay, the flood channels that come out of there, the current field of ripples over by Spirit Lake. There are some, as you can see from the back, some little holes in the ground in the upper right-hand corner. That's where Farragut State Park is. Those divots are called kettles. And a kettle is a result of a big chunk of glacial ice getting buried in the outwash from the gravel, and then later as it all melts away, leaving the hole in the ground. The rightmost hole in the ground is the Farragut State Park Amphitheater. That huge amphitheater that holds 40,000 people was a chunk of ice that melted away. And you can go up there and see that today, just imagine how large that was. So the landscape is certainly different when we peel that away, and you can see the more evidence of the floods that have come through here multiple times. Next slide. So as you mentioned, there were a number of geologists in the 1920s, actually in the 1910s started, to come out here and study these floods. The most well-known was a gentleman named J. Harlan Bretz, who was a professor at the University of Chicago. He actually started teaching at the University of Washington, but moved to Chicago. Came out here in 1922, was his first trip out to explore some strange features that he had seen on maps. If you read some of the current books and things about Bretz, that he came out here and walked all this country, and he rode it on horseback, and that's really, now that we have his field notes, not true. He spent the first couple of years out here riding the trains. In fact, he called it platform geology, observation car platform geology, as he rode all the train tracks in this area and just wrote his nose down as he observed the area. And again, he was out here from 1922 to 1929. published quite a number of papers of the floods, and he was promoting really that catastrophism, which did not sit well with the current geological establishment in Washington, D.C. in the USGS. There was a very famous meeting in 1927 where the geologists at the time really refused to believe that floods caused all this in a period of days. They thought that the landscape in this area had been carved over millennia from glacial outwash. Part of the problem is that all the people that were criticizing him had never been out here and seen it. So once they finally got out here years later, they realized that he might have been wrong. Next slide. This is a hand-drawn map that he did in 1928. It's absolutely amazing. He had, again, was never in an airplane, had no aerial photographs, no satellite photographs. The maps of those days were really quite imprecise. But when you take this hand-drawn map he has and lay it over the current aerial photographs, it's just amazing how well it lines up with him. During the pandemic, Nick Zentner started to do some work on studying the floods, and I worked with him to find Brett's field notes at the University of Chicago. They had been locked up there for safekeeping. It was very difficult to get to them, but we finally got access to the notes, and he asked me to geolocate where they were, my experience with Google Earth. And so we took those field notes and started geolocating where all he had been. I think Nick did a few episodes on that on his YouTube channel. But we've really found some new discoveries with those field notes. They're actually online and you can read those too. Next slide. So he was, again, out here for those years, over 300 days in the field, going all over eastern Washington, northern Idaho, Canada. About 1,000 pages of notes, and I pulled out about 1,600 locations where he was. His field notes, next slide, were both in cursive and in handwriting, or in typed handwriting. The cursive stuff was awful hard to read, obviously, and then the typewritten notes. So we went through all of those and decoded them and found the places where he had visited. Next slide. These are mapped into Google Earth and they're available online. Part of the challenges in finding where he was that the landmarks 100 years ago were train stations, schoolhouses, rural schoolhouses, farms, places that don't exist anymore. So it was quite a treasure hunt to locate some of these places for that. Again, he didn't have topographical maps. So there was a lot of detective work trying to find these locations. Again, he was up in Canada looking for sources of the flood. At one point they thought that maybe a volcano had erupted up in Canada and that volcano had melted all the ice sheets and caused the floods. Never could find the volcanoes. But he was looking all over the Pacific Northwest for the cause of the floods. Strangely, it's still not quite clear why he never collaborated with Joseph Pardue, who in 1910 wrote a paper explaining that there was a glacial lake in Missoula held back by an ice dam at Clark Fork. And that was a paper that was written 12 years before Brett's even came out here. But later, once he started coming out here, next slide, Brett figured not only there was one flood, but he finally determined that there was multiple floods in this area. As they start looking at sediment layers in Walla Walla, there's places down there where you can see evidence of 60 or 70 floods. There's deposits up in the Sandpoint River, up in the Colville Indian Reservation, where there's also 40 or 50 different layers of sediments. When we also got, next slide, another treasure hunt trying to find the field notes of Joseph Pardee. And he was a USGS geologist, again, started working for the USGS in 1910. And we found those notes at an archive in Denver and started translating those. Again, those were all in cursive. He was Joseph Pardee was from Montana. He was a economic geologist. His primary job was as a mining engineer to go around and find geology for mines and looking for ore deposits and things like that. But he was a good geologist, and he wrote down lots of observations as he's driving around the area. And we were really surprised to find that in 1920 he was driving the highway between St. John and Ewan, which is a little bit south of here, and came around the corner and came from the wheat fields and jumped right into the scablands. So he came to the realization at that point that this whole area had been caused by giant floods, glacial floods that carved all the scablands. This is 2 years before Brett's even got here. The bad news is he didn't publish it. So if he didn't publish it, it didn't exist. But really, Joseph Pardee, in some respects, should be getting credit for figuring out that this was the floods here, not J. Harlan Brett's. This next slide is a picture. You can drive that highway today and come around that corner, and you go from the wheat fields straight into the big scablands there. So how do we know how high the water was and when the floods were? One of the things that we're doing right now is looking for glacial erratics. And glacial erratics are ice-rafted erratics, are rocks that are not from around here that have been deposited by the floods. The bedrock in this area is all basalt, and south of here is all the Columbia River basalts, which were formed 16 million years ago is a good number. But when you find big pieces of granite sitting up on top of that, they were not from around here, and they're called erratics. And what we can do is we can take samples off the top of those rocks and find out how long they've been sitting out in the sun. Basically, cosmic rays from supernova are constantly hitting the Earth. They hit the quartz crystals in granite. They turn some of in those crystals, they change beryllium, the element beryllium, into an isotope. We can collect those, count them, and determine how long that the rock's been sitting out in the sun. We really don't care how old the erratic is. We just want to know when it got dropped from there. So we found these erratics up in they're really scattered all around the Spokane area and all the way out to the Willamette Valley, all the way out to the coast. Next slide. Up in the Saltese, which is just over by Liberty Lake where I live, you can hike up there and find lots of them. This one was dated at 16,100 years ago that we found, so we know that there was probably one of the floods dropped it there. Next slide. There was you can drive along the highway up to Spirit Lake, and just to the south of Spirit Lake, a couple miles on the right side of the highway, there's this big rock. It's again carried by ice, dropped 16,200 years ago. Next slide. And this one, which we call Floodzilla, was 40 feet by 50 feet by 20 feet high. Weighs about 2,000 tons, and was floated there on a chunk of ice and left alongside the road. The highway department had built the highway around the front. It doesn't even look like an erratic, but it's so big. But that was dated at 1504, so that was not even the first flood that came through here. As I mentioned, there's erratics all the way over to the Portland area. This is actually a state park over by Salem, Oregon. It's the Erratic Rock National Park, natural site. This was a 90-ton erratic that got dropped there. It's now about 45 tons because people keep stealing pieces of it for some reason, breaking pieces off and taking the erratic home. But this erratic got carried all the way from Clark Fork down through Spokane, down the Columbia River, all the way to the Willamette Valley, and got dropped there by the floodwaters. It's kind of amazing how far these erratics have traveled. And some of them are actually from out of this world. This is a meteorite that was found down by, again, the Willamette Valley. But they found no hole in the ground. This was just sitting up on top of the ground. So the hypothesis is this meteorite landed on the ice sheet up in Canada and eventually was carried down by the glaciers, turned into a floating iceberg, and floated all the way down to the Willamette Valley where it ran aground. And then it got picked up and taken to the New York Museum of Natural History where it sits today. So this one is a out of the world erratic for the floods, which takes us to the next slide. This is some of the areas where you can see the impact. These are the kind of glacially carved lakes at Medicine Lake, Granite Lake over by Airway Heights. And we've dated those at 18.2. There's some outcrops in several of them. We know that was really the first floods that we found now is at 18,200 years when these first lakes were carved by the very first channels. But again, it's left. These floods have left a huge carving on the landscape. Next slide. And you can see, again, the scabland changes from washed all the topsoil away. We can still also use that braided landforms that we've seen. Next slide. And we've discovered those same scablands on Mars. They've determined that Vic Baker, who was photographed there, was one of the early researchers here. He actually knew J. Harlan Bretz. And he took what Bretz has found in terms of his scabland observations and found the same thing on Mars. So it's going to take us a while to get there to find more of the flood evidence, but we can see photographs that we know that giant floods also hit Mars. So that's a little bit about these floods. Next slide. Again, I mentioned I'm with the Floods Institute. We work with the Park Service to do education and outreach. And we do hikes around the area on a regular basis and can do presentations and lectures and things like that. And then lastly, for more information, there's a website that you can see some of these videos, and the field notes for Bretz are there. There's chapters in 11 different areas around the Northwest that are part of the Ice Age floods. And the next slide, if you're more information about this, as I mentioned, Nick Zentner has a huge library of YouTube videos out at YouTube of the floods and the website. So if you're more interested in that, you can go to your heart's desire and learn more details about the floods. But that's a little bit about the history of the Noah's flood and the Ice Age floods.